sovereignty in Bitcoin, or more simply put, being in control of your own money. That's what we're going to talk about. So why do I value this? Why do I think this is important? So self-sovereignty is about being in control of you, right? Of whatever it is that you have or whatever it is that you're doing. It's not somebody else who's in control of it. So in this case, it's about money. But the general concept, I think, is kind of a positive one, right? Nobody wants their freedom to be taken away. Nobody wants somebody else to have control over them. If you want to go somewhere, you don't want to be stopped. And I think that's what self-sovereignty is about. You have the ability to do things that you want to do, and nobody can say no to that. So for you, for the individual, that's strictly better, right? You can always, if you can do more things, that's great. And you can always give it up, right? You can always say, well, I don't want to be in my own control. Maybe I don't trust myself. I don't know, maybe Calvin is more reliable. So, I hand my money to him, for example, so he can manage it for me, right? That's always a decision you can make. You can always go from being in control to not being in control. But the other way around is not really possible. So from the perspective of the individual, it's strictly better. However, for groups, it's kind of a different story, right? What if somebody else misbehaves, right? And you want to control them? If a thief steals something, you want to punish them, right? You want control over those people. So that's kind of where control comes in, and it makes sense in a lot of cases, right? If we want, if we want society to be, we want police to walk around and solve problems for us. So that requires giving up a certain amount of control. So I think self-sovereignty should be applied where it makes sense. And we should kind of try to strive for everybody having the option to have that control. And the internet is maybe one of the examples where you can say that it kind of gave freedom to information. If I want to have my voice and I want to spread it out to many people, I can go on YouTube and I can open a YouTube channel. I can get on Facebook, I can get on Twitter, I can make my voice be heard. And if you compare that to the past, where you had to go through newspapers to reach a decent audience, and there was always kind of a gatekeeper, and it was more difficult. So you were more restricted. So I think generally speaking, it kind of makes sense to move towards more freedom. So if you compare Bitcoin to the current monetary system, to fiat, so there are a few differences that kind of really point towards this having your own control. So fiat, generally speaking, if you go through banks, it's identity based, right? You identify yourself to the bank, and that identity is given to you by the government, and that is really like kind of what connects the money to you. In Bitcoin, you can be anonymous. You can send it to anyone without anyone knowing who was sending it to who. Fiat tends to be inflationary. So what that means is that if you have a certain amount of money, that money will go down in value because somebody else creates more of it. So indirectly, they have control over your money, right? They can make the value of your money go down. In Bitcoin, instead, we have a limited supply. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins. So if you have one Bitcoin, you always know it's 1 out of 21 million. No question about it. Fiat tends to be reversible. Even though you sent it to somebody, if that was an illegal transaction, it can be reversed. It can be moved back. With Bitcoin, it's irreversible. Once you send it out, it's gone, for better or worse, right? Sometimes a thief takes it and sends it out, and we don't want that, but it's irreversible, whether you like it or not. And that is also kind of part of freedom, right? We cannot restrict anyone, including people we would like to see restricted. Confiscatable. The money's on the bank. It's actually an IOU, right? You have to go to the bank and you have to ask for your money back, and then you get paper notes with that actual money. But if they say no, then you don't have your money, right? The bank has to give it to you, but they might not. And obviously, if it goes well with the economy and if there are no problems, You know they will always give you your money, but there is always the fact that they could refuse. And there are strict capital controls. If anyone has ever tried to take significant amounts of money out of the country, they would have noticed that that is quite difficult. There are always limitations to that in order to kind of keep the money inside of the country, keep the wealth inside of the country, and that is, you know, beneficial to the economy, but it's bad for you, right? You want to take your money anywhere, but the countries want to keep the money inside. So Bitcoin does have restrictions. It's not like there are no restrictions. For instance, you cannot create coins out of thin air, right? Like I can't say like, well, you know, I have 1 Bitcoin, but I wish I had 22 million Bitcoins, right? I could say that, but then I'm breaking a rule, right? And you can break it, but what happens is that other people will not follow you anymore. If you break a rule, if you do something that's not within the Bitcoin system, then other people will not listen to you. So if I go and I say that, I say I have 22 million coins, then everybody else will say, well, I'm not going to accept any of those 22 million coins. That's nonsense you're talking about. We're not cooperating with you. So you can kind of think of that as, so you can only really agree with the people that follow the same rules as you. And it's like playing a soccer match, right? You have two teams and they're both playing soccer. And then one person suddenly just picks up the ball and starts running with it, right? And he's not the goalkeeper or anything, right? And then he's breaking a rule, right? So according to everybody who knows the rules of soccer, that team is cheated and basically loses by default because they're not playing by the rules. So you know you can't cooperate if you don't play according to the same rules. So this is essentially, this is consensus, right? This is essentially people working together and agreeing to play by the same set of rules. And this is really great, right? When you do business, you know that everybody in the business world is kind of, is by force in this case, kind of has to do the same things, right? They can't promise you one thing and then cheat you without consequences. And because everybody's playing the same game, you can build sustainable business relationships where you know everybody's going to kind of like follow the system. And the more people participate in this, right, the more you have this kind of global set of rules that everybody agrees on that you know everybody's going to follow, the better. You know, the more people you can interact with, and the more economic activity you can perform. So it makes life predictable. Right? You know what the other person is going to do. You know they're going to play by your rules. So there are kind of two ways that this can be achieved. So one is by force, right? That's kind of by law, or one is voluntary, and that's kind of what I discussed earlier. So if we compare the two, so enforcement means kind of like punishment when you disobey, when you break a rule, right? If you do something wrong, if you sign a contract with another company and you break the rules, you will go to jail, right? Or you pay a penalty, but something, you have to, there are consequences to those actions, and those actions are enforced by law. With voluntary consensus, it's more about not participating, right? As soon as you break a rule, essentially, people stop cooperating with you. You are no longer part of the system if you do something that is not within the rules of the system. So this works well in cases where participation is beneficial, right? As long as it makes more sense for you to be part of the system, then it makes sense for you to break the rules and go off and do your own thing. Then it works. Like you want to follow the rules because you want other people to acknowledge what you're doing. So this is obviously not something that can be useful for every situation. There are situations, like the tragedy of the commons, where your rational individual behavior hurts the group. And examples of this are like fishing. If everybody goes out and catches as many fish as they can, then the ocean will be out of fish. So you need to kind of regulate it. So everybody individually wants to get as many fish as possible, but as a group, you want to modestly do the fishing so the fish can reproduce and it can be more fish later. So this kind of problem is not, it's not quite solvable by this kind of scenario. But in the case of money, I'd argue we can get away with voluntary consensus through Bitcoin. So one of the things that is kind of inherent to the system is that we have this set of rules that we all agree on. That's Bitcoin, right? We all agree that you download a piece of software, and this piece of software is essentially following the rules of Bitcoin. And it really is voluntary, right? It really is everybody just agreeing that that is what Bitcoin is. So we could theoretically change it. We could theoretically say, okay, we're now all going to switch to a different piece of software and follow a different set of rules. To go back to the soccer analogy, we can say, okay, we are gonna now change the rules that if you shoot from halfway past the court and you hit the goal, you get 2 points instead of 1 point. Something like that. If everybody agrees, great, right? We can go and we can move forward and we can implement that rule. So that's kind of assuming everybody wants to change, everybody agrees with the change. But if it's a rule that has some disagreements, maybe I want to change that soccer rule. Maybe South Korea, everybody in South Korea wants to change the soccer rule, but everybody in every other country doesn't, right? So then the question is, well, does South Korea as a country want to abandon all the other countries and play their version of soccer at the expense of kind of losing this group, right? Losing this international, they can no longer perform in the World Cup because they're playing by different rules. Do they want to, do they want to be part of that, or do they want to go out and do their own thing? So, what ends up happening is that there is a large incentive to stay together. There's a large incentive for everybody to play soccer by the same rules. So the network, similar like in Bitcoin, it's conservative, right? It's staying the same, and it's going with what the most people agree with, because having that big network, that's the benefit, right? Being all together and all agreeing is where the value is. So this can be frustrating. Because sometimes conservatism is kind of slow, right? Like you see something and you feel like, oh, this is wrong about the system, or I wish this could change. But you have no power over it, right? You have to go with the majority. Otherwise, you're just gonna be your own like little group of people. And yeah, splitting off is okay if it's worth it, right? If it's worth abandoning all those other users, but usually it's not. So there is a problem with this. Like it's good to change. We would like to change consensus from time to time, and we'd like to kind of move forward, especially in a system like Bitcoin, which is new, requires some changes, requires additional technology. So we need to kind of somehow move forward and all agree how we move forward. But you can't actually count votes on Bitcoin because it's anonymous. So you can't say one person, one vote. A person doesn't exist on the internet. I can have 1,000 computers in front of me, and I can chat as if I'm 1,000 people at the same time. So you can't really count me as a vote. And if you go back and you rely on government issued IDs in order to count votes, well, then you're going back to some centralized authority that that gets to say like you are you, therefore you can vote. And that is what we're moving away from in Bitcoin, right? Where it's supposed to be all voluntary. It's all supposed to be disconnected from authority. So maybe we can do something like coin voting. Maybe we can say like, okay, well, if you own 1 Bitcoin, you have 1 out of 21 million votes. If you have 2 Bitcoins, you have 2 out of 21 million votes. But whether or not this is fair is a little bit questionable. It empowers the rich. So maybe we don't want the richest Bitcoiners to have the most amount of votes. Then expert knowledge is kind of rare, right? If you're talking about a system, a technical system that needs to move forward, well, that's really something that requires a lot of knowledge. If you just let everybody vote about technical things, are you going to get the best outcome, or are you just going to get an outcome of the average person, which doesn't really understand Bitcoin. And on top of that, voting is never unanimous. So there's always going to be a minority vote that says no. Like even something that's really clear, we're probably still going to see like 90% for and 10% against. And then are you going to ignore the 10%? Or are you just going to, push them away because you're not doing what they want? And this is a problem because Bitcoin is not a democracy. Unhappy people will leave the system. If you vote, against the 10%, that 10% is just going to go elsewhere. They're going to, start their own coin, or they move to some other coin. And if you keep doing that, if you keep voting and you keep ignoring the minority, your network will be shrinking. So it's better to have disagreement lead to no change. Right? You don't change at all if not everybody is kind of with the program. And you only really move away from a minority if you think the status quo, not changing, is unacceptable. If the situation that it's at right now is not something you're willing to live with, if you feel like the current Bitcoin is not acceptable, only then does it make sense to kind of abandon the existing user base. So how can we kind of agree on these changes then, right? Basically I pointed out a bunch of issues as to why we can't vote. So then how do we reach consensus? Well, you can make changes that basically least affect the status quo, right? You can make changes where everybody who's currently using the system can still use it in the way that they are using it. And then the changes you're making are basically providing a second option. This is what we've been doing in Bitcoin. If you have paid attention a little bit, we have these we have these systems that work on top of Bitcoin, like the Lightning Network, and we have changes like SegWit even apply here, where you basically have kind of two types of transactions you can put on the blockchain, and the second type is more efficient, but the first type still works. So everybody who wants to use Bitcoin the old way, if you want to use Bitcoin like it was used 8 years ago, you can still do that. It's still fully functional. So these are kind of changes that don't take anything away from the existing users. So generally speaking, I think changes should follow logic, not politics, and I'll get into this a little more. And irrational opinions should not count. If you do not like a direction because of your religion, that is not something we can take into account, right? We can't say this blockchain needs to change because somebody put a line in there that is saying Jesus is the devil or something like that, right? You can put that in the blockchain, and people can object to that, and they can want that to not be there. But that is not something we can build consensus on, because it's something that it's your opinion, and it's not something logic based. Then horse trading is unacceptable. Horse trading is kind of where you have these two political parties that both want something, right? Group A wants this and Group B wants this, and they say okay, well, if you give me this, I'll give you this, and then we agree. So basically they both sacrifice something that they believe in order to kind of be together. And the problem with this is that you always have unhappy people when you do that, right? You're always giving something up that you thought was important. And we'd rather have kind of a system that doesn't move forward if there's something that there's disagreement on. So these are a few of the slides from one of my earlier presentations. So a couple of you have already seen this. But the way Bitcoin achieves consensus is through rough consensus, and I'm going to kind of explain what that process is. So it's a process that's used by the IETF, that's the Internet Engineering Task Force, I believe. Yeah. There's no votes, only technical objections. So we don't go and we see who's for, who's against. We look at what possible objections could there be against this idea or this thing that we might want to put into Bitcoin. And rough consensus is achieved when all these technical objections, every objection that is valid, if it has been addressed and if there's an answer to it or if there's a way to mitigate it, and we go through all of them and we write it out and we put it on the internet for everybody to read, and it's clear that every objection has an answer, then and only then do we move forward. So this makes decisions somewhat more objective, right? We have kind of like this technical way of looking at things, and if there's a rational answer to it, we can kind of agree and say like, yes, this is correct, this is how we move forward. And important is that anyone can review these, right? Anybody can go in and go read it, can see that that system was followed. But this obviously does require some expertise, right? It's not quite that easy if we're talking about technical changes. So are you dedicated enough to go and read it? You know, that's kind of, I guess, the weakness, you could say. So the outcome that's likely is that this is going to be a decision that the least amount of people disagree with. If all the technical objections are sound and we're only left with irrational, emotional objections, then that is very likely to be kind of the best possible outcome. So here's kind of a comparison. I'll be comparing it with politics. So you could say that you've got the experts at the top, and they are debating change. And they go through the rough consensus process, and they put out all the possible objections, and they write about why the objection is not valid or not. And then there are people that kind of look at the debate, and maybe they write articles surrounding the debate, and they try to kind of move that expert knowledge down, right, a level to people that don't have that much knowledge, to kind of translate that expert talk to something that's more comprehensible. Then there are people that just follow the debate, right? They read those articles, they maybe try to read a little bit what the experts are writing, and they form an opinion based on that. And then there's the general population, which doesn't have the time to go through all this. Quite frankly, that makes total sense, right? Not everybody can be an expert. So what do you do if you're not an expert, right? You go and you pick someone, you look at, I'll look at Ben, for example, and I say like, well, I trust Ben, and Ben tells me, these experts, it makes total sense, this is all completely correct. Then I'm like, okay, well, I'll vote for what Ben is voting for, right? So that's kind of the rough consensus model, where there's complete transparency. If you put in the effort, you can always move up the ladder, right? You can always figure it out all the way up until the expert level, and you can verify everything. Obviously, you're not going to because it's too much effort, but there are other people who are doing it, and the very fact that it's possible and that anybody can do it makes it kind of a very appealing process. So if we compare this to political consensus, here things are very different. Right? We got these politicians that are debating, and then we also got people who are writing about it. We've got people who follow the debate, but at the end, we've got the population who has to now vote. Right? They have to basically figure out which of these experts is right and which of them is wrong. And we're kind of assuming that they're good at this, right? But depending on what your opinion is on American politics, you might disagree that this is something that works. But generally it devolves into a popularity debate, right? Where you have these people that are trying to appeal to the general audience, not through technical knowledge, not through expertise, but through popularity, right? Trying to appeal to the common man and looking just like them, and it's more manipulation based, right? It's more manipulative. So I think this is not a very good model for something that's inherently technical, especially. And the rough consensus model, I don't know if it could be applied to politics. I haven't really thought about that, but that might be an interesting one. Yeah. So, roughly speaking, the benefits of rough consensus, it's a logic-based technical answer to problems. It's verifiable that the process was followed. Illogical opinions, they do not influence the decisions. And perhaps most importantly, and this is crucial, right? Because otherwise this would be just a system of people at the top being in power. Users still have the ultimate power. Even if you're at the bottom, you can leave, right? You can walk away. And the more easy it is to walk away, the better. And it's very easy in something like Bitcoin, right? There are many other coins out there, and you can move over anytime you like. And this is maybe different in politics, right? Like if you don't like the politics in your country, you can't leave. You can, but there's so many costs around leaving that it is very difficult. Okay, so in summary, self-sovereignty has certain value. Bitcoin does that by giving you control over your own money. It's important to kind of understand how the decision-making process works. And you can participate to the degree that you think is needed. You don't have to participate at all if you don't think it's necessary, but the fact that you can, and the fact that you know that this process is going on, I think is a very important part of how comfortable you feel being part of the system. Thank you.